The alien woman considered him just another soldier, until the woman beside her exposed the truth. The compact observer arrived at Keth 3 Transit Way Station at 6:10, 7 minutes ahead of her scheduled window, and spent the first 4 of those minutes reading the escort assignment manifest in the corridor outside the staging bay before she walked through the door. Ashav Velkeen did this with every posting. She had learned, across 14 years of Velnarath compact service, that the 4 minutes before a first meeting told you more about what you were walking into than any briefing document. The manifest told her the mission: diplomatic relay data retrieval, Keth 3 to sector boundary post 11, 3-day transit window, and the mission told her what kind of soldiers she'd be working with. Relay data retrieval was a courier task dressed in a diplomatic frame. The Terran Alliance sent escort units for courier tasks the way they sent weather reports, routinely, without particular consideration. The unit would be able-bodied, probably punctual, certainly armed, and functionally interchangeable with the last unit she'd worked with on a task like this one. She stood in the corridor and read the manifest in the blue-gray light of the Keth 3 morning shift. 3 names, personnel file for each. She moved through them the way she moved through most logistical documents, quickly, absorbing what was relevant and filing the rest. The first 2 names she noted without registering anything beyond their ranks. The third, Corporal Saren Tail, assigned field lead, she read twice, not because anything in his file stood out, but because she had been in the habit of reading field leads' names twice since the Veth 2 assignment 4 years ago, when she'd failed to note a prior disciplinary record and spent 3 days managing consequences that could have taken 3 hours to prevent. She did not make the same mistake twice. That was not a principle she articulated. It was simply how she operated. Corporal Tail's file was clean. Field deployment, 22 months. No citations beyond a standard commendation for the Keth 7 perimeter work, which every member of that unit had received, and which was therefore not particularly informative. No specialist designations beyond basic combat engineering certification. Terran University, biology, which was an unusual undergraduate degree for a field corps placement, but not unheard of. The Alliance's recruitment pipeline was broad, and people arrived at field postings through indirect paths. Nothing in the file that suggested either a particular strength or a particular liability. She filed him under the category she used for most Terran escorts: competent, replaceable, unlikely to complicate anything. She walked through the staging bay door at 6:14 and found all 3 of them already present, which meant they had arrived before her 6:10 arrival, which she noted with the particular attention she gave to things that were slightly unexpected. 2 of the soldiers, Privates As and Khan, she placed them from the manifest, were standing near the transit prep console, running a standard equipment check with the calm efficiency of people who had done the same check enough times that it no longer required much conscious attention. They acknowledged her entrance with brief professional nods and returned to their work. The third, Corporal Tail, she placed him by the field lead insignia on his jacket, was seated on a supply crate at the far end of the bay, reading something on a data pad with the particular quality of attention she usually associated with researchers and archive specialists rather than soldiers. It was not the vague, distracted reading of someone passing time. It was the close, still attention of someone who was genuinely inside a document, tracking an argument from point to point. He was not reading the mission briefing. She could see the document format from across the bay even at this distance. It was formatted as a journal article. Dense text, technical formatting, no graphics that she could make out. He looked up when she entered, registered her presence with a brief nod, not perfunctory, not overly attentive, precisely calibrated to the moment. Then he closed the article, without bookmarking it, which meant he had either already finished it or held his place by memory, and stood. "Corporal Tail," he said, "field lead for this transit. We're prepped and ready at your direction, Observer Velkeen." He pronounced her name correctly on the first attempt. Velnarath nomenclature had three places that Terrans most commonly mispronounced: the aspirated consonant cluster in the honorific, the tonal distinction between the given and clan portions, and the particle vel, which was either softened incorrectly or hardened past recognition. He had handled all three without apparent effort. Most Terrans required 2 attempts. Some required 3 and an apology. She filed it, not as a significant data point. Terrans with language training or long compact exposure could get it right on a first attempt, but as a note, a small one. She did not make large conclusions from small data points. "We depart on schedule," she said. "Thank you, Corporal." The transit from Keth 3 to the sector boundary ran along a compact relay chain that required 3 waypoint stops for data packet handoff. The first stop, Waypoint Reth, was an automated transfer station with no personnel interaction. The transit through it took 4 hours and required nothing of anyone. Tail ran the staging procedures with brisk competence, and then, once the transit was underway and there was nothing operationally required, returned to his data pad and his reading. She worked on her mission pre-documentation. She reviewed the diplomatic data transfer protocols she would need to execute at Boundary Post 11. She read the post commander's most recent status report on the relay chain's operational status in this sector. The chain had been running at approximately 94% efficiency for the past 6 weeks, which was within acceptable parameters for a boundary sector installation. She compiled her authorization verification sequence and confirmed the diplomatic data certification numbers against the originating registry copy she carried. These were tasks she could do in any order, and she had done equivalent tasks so many times that they did not absorb her completely. They left a portion of her attention free to note the shape of the transit cabin around her, the behavior of the unit, the ambient signals that told her whether a mission was likely to run smoothly or to develop complications she hadn't anticipated. The unit was quiet, professional. The 2 privates worked through their own documentation and downtime without creating friction. They seemed accustomed to each other, had likely been posted together for some time, and had developed the companionable efficiency of people who did not need to narrate their working process to each other. She filed them as reliable, low maintenance. Tail read. She could not see his screen from where she was positioned, but she could see the pace at which he moved through documents, the long passages of stillness, the occasional pause of someone who had encountered something that warranted a second read, the absence of any of the skim and scroll behavior she associated with people reading for appearances rather than content. He turned the data pad's virtual pages at irregular intervals, longer in some sections than others, which suggested he was reading analytically rather than simply consuming text. At one point he made a note, not on the data pad, in a small physical notebook he produced from his jacket pocket, which was unusual enough that she registered it as the single most unexpected thing she had observed about him so far. He wrote 3 lines, precise and small, and returned the notebook to his pocket. Field personnel who used physical notebooks were not common. It was a personal quirk, and personal quirks were data. She did not know yet what this particular datum meant. She noted it and left it uninterpreted. She returned to her pre-documentation. They were 3 hours into the transit when she looked up and found that he had finished his first article and started a second. She could not tell if they were related, same subject, or adjacent topics in the same field, but the transition between them had been immediate. No pause to look at the middle distance the way most readers did when they finished something, processing what they'd read before moving on. He had simply proceeded. She thought, either he processes quickly, or he had read this before, or he is not looking for an experience at the end of it, only information. She thought it was probably all 3. She made a note of this in the particular section of her memory she reserved for things that were not yet significant but might become significant. Waypoint Cella required a manual authorization from a compact relay technician and typically took 40 minutes. The station was staffed by a small permanent crew, and the relay technician on duty when they arrived was a young Velnarath man named Ress who was on his first solo rotation. This was evident from his posture, and from the particular quality of attention he was paying to everything in the room, the focused anxiety of someone who was monitoring himself doing his job rather than simply doing it. Asha expected some delay. First rotation technicians often needed more time because they were checking their own work multiple times, which was actually good practice even if it extended the window. She had 40 minutes. She was prepared for 50. What she was not prepared for was an error in the authorization handoff sequence. Ress entered the data packet verification code in the wrong field first, which was recoverable, a simple entry error, and then entered it correctly, but into a handoff window that had already expired because the time it took him to notice the first error and correct it had pushed them past the timeout. The authorization terminal responded by locking for a 12-minute security reset cycle. 12 minutes was not a problem. She was about to say so when Corporal Tail said, quietly and without drawing particular attention to himself, "The reset will unlock the primary terminal, but the secondary handoff log won't auto-clear the null entry from the first attempt. If Technician Ress doesn't clear it manually before the reset cycle completes, the verification will route through the secondary as a flagged incomplete entry and go to the regional audit queue. That would take 6 to 8 hours." She looked at him. He was watching the terminal with the same expression he had been reading his data pad with throughout the transit, focused, calm, and without any apparent desire to be seen for what he had just said. He was not offering it to be noticed. He was offering it because it was actionable and the 12-minute window was finite. "You know the Cella relay authorization architecture," she said. "I've worked around relay installations," he said. "The secondary log behavior is specific to this station generation. It doesn't auto-clear on reset." She turned to Ress. "Clear the null entry from the secondary handoff log before the reset completes." Ress found the correct field, cleared it, and confirmed the action with 20 seconds remaining in the reset cycle. The authorization completed without routing to the regional queue. The transit clock stayed on schedule. Asha returned to her pre-documentation while the final authorization ran through. Behind her, she heard Tail exchange a brief word with Ress, not about the error. She did not hear any language that would have read as commentary on the technician's mistake. He asked about the station generation, when the relay hardware had been last serviced, something technical and neutral. Ress, who had been rigid with the particular shame of someone who had just made an error in front of people who mattered, relaxed by a degree that was visible from across the room. She filed this too, the relay architecture familiarity, and also the specific way he had handled the aftermath of it. Boundary Post 11 sat at the terminus of the Keth sector relay chain, a modest installation by compact standards, 12-person security detail. A Terran liaison team that had been in residence for 7 months, functional and permanent but not large. The post commander was a Velnarath woman named Vel Orath, who had the efficiency of someone who had learned to run a tight installation and preferred not to have that efficiency tested by complications. The retrieval itself was straightforward. Data packet verification, physical copy transfer for the diplomatic backup files. The physical copies existed as redundancy against relay failure, required by protocol for any diplomatic tier data transfer, and had never in her 14 years of service actually been needed for their original purpose, and a brief exchange with Commander Vel Orath on the relay network status in this sector. The complication arrived with the backup file transfer. The physical copy system used a Velnarath encoding standard that had been updated 3 months prior. The Post 11 archival system was running the preceding standard. This was not supposed to be a problem. The handoff documentation had been certified compatible before departure, and compatibility certification was not a casual process. But certification happened on controlled systems in controlled conditions, and the actual transfer was happening on hardware that had accumulated its own particular operational history, and the two realities did not always align as neatly as the documentation suggested. The transfer terminal produced an error code. She reached for her reference guide. This was not uncertainty, she verified before assuming. It was faster and more reliable than working from partial memory. She was reaching for the guide, already scanning for the relevant error family, when behind her she heard Tail say, V-493. Encoding epic mismatch. The archive is reading the new standard header correctly, but it can't parse the internal checksum because the file was compiled under the old authentication tree, and the post system is trying to verify it against the new tree. It's a version lineage conflict, not a corruption. She turned around. He had his hands behind his back and was looking at the terminal with the same focused, unhurried expression. His voice was level. He was not presenting himself. He was, again, simply producing information because the information was relevant and he had it. The workaround, he continued, is to request an epic bridge translation from the post's external relay node before the transfer handshake closes. The bridge generates a compatibility layer between the authentication trees. It adds approximately 8 minutes to the transfer, but the file integrity stays intact. She was looking at him. It's the cleanest solution, he said. The alternative is a manual re-encoding, which takes longer and introduces a small but real risk of selective data loss, depending on how the archive handles the conversion. She said, "You know the encoding architecture." He said, "The error code is specific. It tells you what's happening." "Where did you encounter it?" He considered this for a moment, in the same way he had considered everything, not hesitating but processing, finding the precise answer rather than the approximate one. "I've worked extensively around relay encoding systems," he said. "The epic mismatch family is something I've had to troubleshoot before." She requested the epic bridge translation from the post's external relay node. The transfer completed 8 minutes and 20 seconds later with full file integrity confirmed. Commander Vel Orath, who had been watching the exchange with the politely neutral expression of someone who had learned not to insert herself into compact observer workflows, offered the use of the way station commissary while the final verification ran. Asha accepted. She walked toward the commissary with Tail behind her and the two privates taking their standard flanking positions, and she was thinking about the encoding architecture, and about 14 months near a relay installation, and about the gap between what a 14-month posting proximity would realistically teach someone about transfer system error codes and what she had just watched him produce on demand. The numbers she was finding did not quite line up. She noted this and did not yet know what to do with it. The commissary at Boundary Post 11 was a small room, long table, functional beverage dispenser, 3 windows overlooking the boundary relay array that hummed its continuous cycle in the near dark of the outer sector. It had the practical warmth of a room that was used by people who needed a break from operational focus, not one that had been designed for comfort as its primary purpose. As and Khan took their beverages, positioned themselves near the door in the way soldiers positioned themselves near doors when they wanted to be available without being present, and began a quiet conversation Asha did not attend to. Tail collected his beverage, something hot. She noted he hadn't asked what was available, had simply made his selection with the economy of someone who knew his preferences and acted on them, and took a position near the window, not near any of the chairs. He stood at the window and looked out at the relay array with his beverage, and the same quality of still attention he had given to his data pad on transit. She sat at the table and opened the preliminary transfer verification on her data pad. 3 pages in, the commissary door opened. A woman Ashad did not recognize entered, took in the room in the way people took in a room when they were entering a space that might contain people they knew, and then her scan landed on Tail and stopped. "Saren," she said. The word had the quality of someone recalibrating a mental image. "I didn't know you were on rotation here." Tail turned from the window. He looked at the woman and something in his face shifted. She had been watching his face long enough to have a baseline, and the shift was real, specific. The adjustment of someone encountering a context they had not anticipated and processing it in real time. "Dr. Oz," he said. The title was automatic, a reflex that told her the relationship, professional, established, and from a context that predated his current posting. "I didn't know you were at the boundary post." The woman, Dr. Oz, looked at his jacket. Her eyes moved to the field corps insignia, to the rank, and she stopped there in the way that people stopped at pieces of information that did not fit their existing model of a person. "Field corps," she said. "How long have you been enlisted?" "Almost 2 years." She absorbed this. 2 years. Not a question. A repetition of information she was integrating. Then she looked across the room and registered, for the first time with full attention, that there was a compact observer seated at the table, data pad open, watching this exchange with the precise attention of someone whose job had trained her to watch exchanges like this and read what they contained. Dr. Oz's expression became slightly more contained, the professional recalibration of someone who had been in a private moment and had just noticed it was a public one. She looked back at Tail. "You should have told the Institute," she said, and there was something beneath the professional surface in her voice, something that was not quite criticism and not quite concern, and was the particular quality of a colleague who has been unexpectedly cut out of information they felt they had a right to. "When I left, Tail said. His voice was even. "Dr. Velkeith has been citing your Keth boundary survey work in 3 subsequent papers," she said. "There were questions about the attribution. He didn't know if you wanted to be named because he couldn't reach you. It's his work to use. Saren, you co-authored 4 of the primary survey datasets. Your encoding models appear in the methodology section of 9 of the Institute's last 12 papers." She paused, and something changed in her expression. The professional containment gave way briefly to something that Ashad could only read as genuine exasperation on behalf of someone who was not present to be exasperated at. "When you left, Dr. Velkeith spent an entire month having someone verify the authenticity of the encoding framework you built, because he couldn't believe one person had constructed something that complete in 4 years. He kept assuming he was missing collaborators." Tail said, "I had collaborators. Velkeith was the primary. On the atmospheric analysis work, on the encoding infrastructure you were the primary." She paused. "He knows that. He's been saying it in every paper. Your name is in every methodology note. He just hasn't been able to reach you to ask if you wanted a co-author line on the subsequent work. He can list me if he wants to. He would need your permission. He has it. I'll tell him that." She looked at his rank insignia again. Corporal. The word had a quality, not dismissive, but the specific quality of a title that was much smaller than the one that preceded it, and the gap between them was visible to anyone who knew what the preceding one had been. She looked at Ashad, and now her expression was the clearest thing in the room. It was the expression of someone who had realized that the person sitting at this table did not have access to the information she had just been provided, and who was making a decision about what to do with that. "Has he been useful?" she asked. She was asking Ashad, but she kept the edge of her attention on Tail, watching him process being asked about in front of him, with a look that Ashad was beginning to identify as a very specific kind of fond exasperation. Ashad set down her data pad. "Dr. Oz," she said, "what is the Velnara Survey Institute?" Dr. Myril Oz, Research Coordinator, Velnera Survey Institute, 6 years tenure, currently returning from a xenobiological field survey in the outer relay corridor, transiting through boundary post 11 on a supply stop, sat down at the table with her own beverage and told Asha this. The Velnara Survey Institute was the Compact's primary xenobiological research body for the Keth boundary sector. It maintained a standing research staff of approximately 40, with additional rotating fellows from Terran and Compact academic institutions. Its core work was xenobiological survey methodology, developing the frameworks and tools that allowed researchers to assess, document, and interpret the biological systems of the boundary sector's inhabited and potentially inhabited regions. Corporal Saren Tail had arrived at the Institute 11 years ago as a junior research fellow. He had a Terran University degree in xenobiology, the unusual undergraduate degree she'd noted in his file, and an interest in applying Velnerath survey methodology to boundary sector ecological mapping, which was a niche enough intersection that the Institute had been glad to have him. He had been productive from the beginning, which was not guaranteed with junior fellows, many of whom required a significant adjustment period before they began generating useful work. He had stayed for 4 years. In 4 years, Dr. Oss spoke with the careful precision of someone who had reviewed this record more than once and was not embellishing. He had co-authored 14 published papers, produced a set of encoding models for the Institute's relay-dependent survey data systems, and built what the Institute's lead researchers now used as the methodological baseline for all boundary sector survey work in the relay network corridor. The encoding models. Asha looked at Tail. He was standing at the window again. He had returned to it at some point in the last few minutes, and he was watching the relay array with his beverage and the expression of someone who was present in the room, but had granted Dr. Oss latitude to speak without interjecting. He had not interjected once. He left 2 years before enlisting, Dr. Oss said. Family situation, he told me at the time. I don't know the details. She paused. He told Dr. Velkeith he needed a different kind of posting. He was gone within a month. He didn't, she stopped, chose her words. He didn't leave a forwarding contact. Asha looked at his profile in the window light. The relay array's slow rotation cast an even blue on the glass. He was not watching her. He was watching the array. She thought about V-493, about the Epic Bridge translation, about the secondary handoff log at Waypoint Sela, and 14 months near a relay installation, and the way those 2 data points had not quite lined up even before she'd had any other information to compare them against. She thought about 4 years. Why did you leave the Institute? She asked. Not Dr. Oss, she asked Tail directly, because it was his answer she wanted. He turned from the window. He looked at her with the same expression he had used for every technical exchange, patient, focused, not defensive. Family situation, he said. I needed to be on a different kind of posting, something that moved quickly and didn't require long-term residential commitments. The field corps posts quickly, she said. Yes. And offers transit flexibility. Yes, a pause. The work is also, the transit time is substantial. The posting work is operationally demanding when it's demanded. The downtime between is significant. He glanced at his data pad where he'd left it on the table when he went to the window. It's compatible with keeping current on the literature, more or less. She thought about 3 journal articles on transit. She thought about a physical notebook. Why did you not say this earlier? She said. It was not quite a question. He considered it. The mission is a relay data retrieval. My research background is not relevant to whether the transit is correctly run, whether the security sweep is complete, or whether the data transfer goes through cleanly. Those are the relevant things. It was relevant at Waypoint Sela, she said. That was a practical problem with a known solution. It was relevant at the transfer terminal. Same. She looked at him. He looked back without filling the silence, and she had by now observed enough about him to know that this was not discomfort. It was the same precision applied to conversation that he applied to everything else. He said what was accurate. He did not append things to make the silence less noticeable. "You didn't think I would ask," she said. He paused. "I thought if it was relevant it would become apparent." "And if it didn't become apparent?" "Then it wasn't relevant." He met her eyes. "I'm not particularly interested in being assessed as something I'm not," he said. "But I'm also not interested in making a case for being assessed differently than the assignment suggests. I'm a field corps corporal on an escort mission. That's what the assignment is." Dr. Oss, who had been quiet for several minutes with the expression of someone watching an educational process she had not expected to be part of today, said, "He's always been like this." "Yes," Asha said. She was still looking at Tail. "I believe it." She picked up her data pad. Set it down again. There was a quality to the situation. She was finding words for it now, where before she had simply been filing and moving on. That required her to sit with it for a moment rather than immediately converting it into documentation. She had been wrong. Not about the mission, and not about his competence. The mission had been running well from the first hour, which meant her assessment of that was intact. But about the category, about the level. She had been looking at him through the lens of what the manifest contained, and what the manifest contained was a fraction of what he was, and she had not asked the right questions to find the rest of it. She was very rarely wrong about assessments this significantly. She maintained her calibration precisely because she acknowledged corrections immediately and did not defend prior positions past the point where defense was warranted. The correction was, he was not what she had filed him as, and she had been wrong, and it was time to update. She updated. Dr. Oss said, "I should get back to my transit." She stood, looked at Tail with the fond exasperation that had been there since she walked in. "Dr. Velkeith is going to be impossible when I tell him." "Please don't." "I'm absolutely going to." She picked up her case. She paused at the door and looked at Asha, and what was in her expression was specific and direct, and Asha received it as it was intended. "Take care of him," she said, and then she was through the door and gone. The commissary held its quiet. Oss and Khan, near the door, had the professional neutrality of soldiers who had heard everything, and were not acknowledging that they had heard anything. Private Oss, not the doctor, the private, the naming collision was going to be a source of minor difficulty for the next 12 days, was studying the surface of her beverage with great interest. Tail was looking at the space where Dr. Oss had been. Not watching her go, she had already gone. Looking at the door with the expression of someone who had just been seen more clearly than they had planned for, from a direction they had not anticipated. Asha watched him. She thought about the 4 minutes in the corridor this morning. She was very good at using 4 minutes well. She did the preparation she needed to do, assembled the information available to her, and formed a working hypothesis that guided how she approached the first meeting. It was a reliable method. It had been reliable for 14 years. It had not been reliable this morning because what was available to her, the manifest, the file, the rank, the 22 months of field deployment, was not what he was. It was a portion of it. A small portion, as it turned out. The portion that was currently visible. She thought about whether that was his error or hers. Both, she concluded. Hers, because she had not asked the right questions when the data she had didn't fully account for what she was observing. His, because he had answered narrowly when a broader answer would have served the mission better, and he had known it and chosen the narrower path anyway. Not from deception. She did not think that, but from the particular principle she had just watched Dr. Oss's expression confirm. He did not perform for anyone, and he was perhaps too precise in his definition of performance. She said that as a directive, she said, not a pleasantry. He looked at her. His expression shifted, very slightly, in the particular way it shifted when he encountered something that required him to recalibrate his sense of the situation. "I know," he said. "She's known you for how long?" "We overlapped at the Institute for about 6 months at the end of my posting there. She was a newer fellow." He paused. "She's been there longer than anyone who was there when I arrived now. And she still tracks your citation record." He looked away. The relay array outside the window was completing a slow rotation, and the light it cast moved across his profile in an even, unhurried wave. "I didn't know she was doing that," he said, with the quality of someone who had genuinely not known, and who found the information complicated in a way he was not going to elaborate on in present company. "She cares about the attribution," Asha said, "about your name being accurate in the record." "It's her field," he said. "She knows what the work cost. And you don't track it." "I know what it cost," he said. "I don't need to track the citation record to know that." She looked at him steadily. He was looking at the window, not performing distance. He was genuinely looking at the array, but there was something in his posture that she was reading as the particular stillness of someone who had just been opened slightly more than they had planned, and was sitting with that fact. "And she still tracks your citation record." He looked away, apparently. The commissary was quiet for another moment. Outside the windows, the relay array ran its cycle. Asha looked at him in profile, at the field corps jacket, the corporal's insignia, the data pad on the table with whatever article he'd been reading before Dr. Oss arrived, at the physical notebook in his breast pocket. She thought about the encoding models, about 14 papers, about a methodological baseline that the Institute's researchers had been using for 7 years. She thought about a manifest she had read for 4 minutes in a corridor, and the category she had placed him in, and the precision with which that category was now wrong. "The relay encoding models," she said, "the ones Dr. Oss mentioned. The Institute uses them as the baseline for boundary sector survey work. Dr. Velkeith and I developed the primary structure together," he said. "The contributions were significant on both sides. I don't think it's accurate to separate them cleanly." Dr. Oss was fairly specific about the distribution. "Dr. Oss has a perspective," he said. "I have mine. I don't think mine is the objective one." He paused. "I was there to learn from Velkeith. That was the arrangement. What I contributed came out of what he taught me. The accounting is complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, steady and patient, not asking for anything. "You've been inside those models for 11 years, she said. "That's why you knew the error code." "Yes. The Epic Bridge translation. I've run it before, many times during the survey data transfers at the Institute. And at Waypoint Cella. The relay authorization architecture is an adjacent system. Once you understand the encoding family, the authorization architecture makes a certain kind of sense." She said, "I placed you in the wrong category this morning." He was very still for a moment. "Then you placed me in the category the manifest suggested." The manifest was insufficient. Manifests generally are. "I don't generally find them to be," she said. "I find them to be adequate for what they're intended to do, logging mission-relevant personnel qualifications in a legible format." She paused. "Your mission-relevant qualifications were not in the manifest. They weren't listed as mission-relevant by whoever compiled the manifest," he said. "They were mission-relevant," she said, "twice." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "twice." The final verification notification chimed from the post's relay terminal, indicating that the transfer confirmation had completed and was ready for her sign-off. Asha picked up her data pad, looked at it, set it back down. There were 9 items she wanted to note before she stood up, and she was going to note all of them before she went to sign off on the transfer, because she was precise, and she did not defer documentation to memory if she could help it. She wrote 3 of them before she said, without looking up, "The Sector 4 relay network has been generating unexplained audit queue referrals for several months. The network engineering team hasn't isolated the source." She finished the 3rd note and started the 4th. "If you have any familiarity with the Sector 4 relay architecture from your institute work, that analysis may be worth discussing on the return transit." A pause. "I have some familiarity," he said. "On the return transit then," she said. She finished her notes, picked up her data pad, and went to sign off on the transfer. The return transit from boundary post 11 to Keth 3 was 4 hours. The first 40 minutes were operationally occupied: departure sweep, waypoint Sela confirmations, handoff verification. After that there was time. Asha said, "The Sector 4 relay network." She had her data pad open, and the supplementary logs she'd carried in the mission documentation but not yet reviewed. The audit queue referrals. Tail had his data pad on the seat beside him, closed. He was already focused on her without having had to disengage from anything, which she had come to understand was simply how he operated. Attentive at baseline, no transition required. "What's the referral pattern?" he said. "Irregular but not random. 7 to 9 months of elevated queuing, slowly declining over the past 6 to 7 weeks. She passed him her data pad with the supplementary log visible. He looked at it for approximately 30 seconds, not scanning, reading. She could see his eyes moving through the data and passed it back. "Authentication drift," he said. "Not encoding error." The Sector 4 regional relay nodes were on the staggered update rollout for the new security token architecture, the update that the central hub completed 18 months ago. The staggered regional completion ran until approximately 8 months ago for the outermost Sector 4 nodes. When the new tokens rolled in, the authentication tree started recalibrating on a 90-day cycle. If the drift between the old and new tree alignment peaks at around the 45-day mark in each cycle, you'd see elevated audit queuing at those intervals. She pulled up the referral timing in the logs, marked the peaks, looked at the intervals. 42 days, 47 days, 44 days. "The declining trend in the last 6 weeks," he continued, "is the tokens completing their second full cycle under the new architecture. The first cycle is always the roughest. The drift is widest because the baselines are furthest apart. By the end of the second cycle, the tree alignment is tighter. By the end of the third, you probably won't see elevated queuing anymore. Another 2 to 3 months. She looked at the timeline, then at him. "This isn't something you should know from 14 months near a relay installation." He held her gaze without particular defensiveness. "No, it's something I know from 4 years working on relay encoding systems as a core component of my research." He paused. "I told you earlier that the encounter at Sela came from relay familiarity. That was accurate. It wasn't complete." "You were careful," she said. "I wasn't deliberately misleading you," he said. "I answered what you asked." "You answered what I asked," she said, "and the questions I asked were insufficient." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Why didn't you correct for that?" He took a moment, not a hedging moment, a locating the accurate answer moment. She recognized the difference now. "I didn't want to present myself as something different than the assignment indicated," he said. "I told you that in the commissary. It's not." He stopped, reformulated. "I'm not in the field corps as a research fellow. I'm here because it's the posting that fit what my life needed. I do the work the posting requires. I don't think making a case for being seen as more than that is the right approach to an escort mission." "And if I hadn't asked?" "You asked because Dr. Oss walked in. If she hadn't, the mission would have completed without my research history being relevant to anything except the 2 practical problems we solved. It would have been relevant to the Sector 4 analysis." He paused. "I would have mentioned the authentication drift in the mission notes," he said, "as something to flag for the network engineering team. I probably would have attributed it to relay familiarity and let it go at that. and it would have been substantially less useful. Probably. She thought about this. About the version of the mission in which Dr. Oss had not transited through boundary post 11, in which she had returned to Keth 3 with her data retrieved, and her transfer complete, and her understanding of the person in the escort unit intact and entirely insufficient, in which the Sector 4 analysis would have landed in the network engineering team's queue with a plausible but underinformed explanation and been addressed accordingly. The encoding models, she said. The baseline methodology. If I ask Dr. Velkeith about them, what will he tell me? Tail was quiet for a moment. He'll tell you they work, he said, and that they were a collaborative effort, and probably that the collaboration was weighted in my direction on the encoding architecture, which is his characterization and not. I think it's more balanced than he presents it. He has a particular way of distributing credit. Generously, she said. Generously, he agreed. And the 14 papers. He looked out the transit window. The relay array at boundary post 11 had long since receded into the background of stars. They were good papers, he said. It was good work. I was glad to have been part of it. And then you left. And then I left. She did not ask about the family situation again. She had asked once in the commissary. He had answered with the shape of it. She knew that the shape was all she was being offered and that it was offered honestly. She was precise. She did not repeat questions she had already received accurate answers to, even when the answers were partial. Partial was sometimes all there was. The Sector 7 network corridor, she said, after a moment. I have an assignment there in 6 weeks. The relay architecture is more complex than the Keth boundary chain. The encoding epoch documentation has a gap in the drift correction methodology that the network engineering team has flagged but not resolved. He looked at her. Encoding architecture familiarity would be operationally useful, she said, beyond a field core escort function. He was still looking at her. His expression had the quality of careful attention that she had been reading all day, and underneath it was something she was finding increasingly legible. The particular stillness of someone who was receiving information they had not anticipated and processing it with the same precision they applied to everything else. I could put in a transfer request for the posting window, he said, if the observer's office made a formal assignment request. That would be the appropriate channel, she said. I'll look into the process, he said. The assignment runs 12 days, she said. I'll forward the current Sector 7 technical review. The drift correction section has the specific gap I mentioned. It's been flagged for 8 months. I'd like to read it, he said. She nodded and returned to her data pad. After a moment, she heard him retrieve his data pad from the seat beside him, and she heard the quiet of someone reading, the same particular quality she had registered in the staging bay at 6:14 this morning, which she had been observing for 12 hours now, and could distinguish with confidence from any other kind of quiet. She made her notes. The mission was nearly complete. The relay data was secured. The authentication drift analysis was clear, actionable, and would be useful to the network engineering team. She thought about the category she had assigned him in a corridor this morning. About the 4 minutes she had spent reading a manifest and arriving at a conclusion that was accurate as far as it went and insufficient in every direction that mattered. She made a final note, not in the mission report, in the separate observation log she maintained for personnel she expected to encounter again. Under his name she wrote, Relay Encoding Expertise, Institute-Level Methodology Baseline. Sector 7, Assignment Appropriate. Revisit Intake Evaluation Framework for Field Personnel with Non-Standard Qualification Histories. She paused, added one line, Assessment Error Day 1 Self-Correction Complete. No further review required. She did not note, I would like to understand what the family situation was. She did not note, there is something in the way he looks out windows that I have been paying attention to since Waypoint Sella. She noted things that were accurate and relevant and appropriate to document. She was very good at this. The things that were accurate but not yet appropriate to document she held with equal precision and did not write down and did not dismiss. They were data. She would wait for their relevance to become clear. They arrived at Keth 3 at 1847. The mission debrief took 17 minutes. Ashaf filed the transfer documentation, submitted her mission report with the Sector 4 authentication drift analysis flagged as high confidence preliminary, recommended for regional network engineering review. She was standing outside the staging bay with her transit case, reviewing her connection schedule, when she heard footsteps in the corridor and Tail said, "Observer Velkeen." She turned. He was standing in the corridor with his field pack over one shoulder and his data pad in his hand, and the expression of someone who had made a decision about something while walking here and was now executing it. "If the Sector 7 assignment request goes through the observer's office," he said, "I'll have read the technical review before arrival. I can have a preliminary analysis of the drift correction gap ready for the first day, if that would be useful." She looked at him. The Keth 3 morning shift had given way to evening. The corridor light was warmer now, a different shade of blue, and it made the field core jacket look slightly different than it had at 6:14. She was aware of having spent 12 hours recalibrating something that had taken her 4 minutes to get wrong. "That would be useful," she said. "Then I'll prepare it." He paused. "The second corrective approach, the boundary condition one, I think it's probably the most tractable. The others require access to the node hardware directly. The second approach can be implemented from the regional relay management layer." She had not mentioned a second corrective approach. She thought for a moment and realized he was already ahead of her, already thinking through the problem, already generating candidate solutions before she had formally asked him to. "Send me the outline," she said, "tonight if you have it." "I'll put it together," he said. He did not say anything else. He shifted the pack on his shoulder slightly, a settling motion, and looked at her. "Corporal Tail," she said. "Observer Velkeen." "The manifest was inadequate," she said. "Not because it was poorly compiled, because you have built a professional history that does not fit easily into standard qualification fields. Future observers assigned to you will have the same problem I had." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "I'm going to note the gap in the assignment documentation system when I file my personnel observation report." She paused. "That note will reflect on your record as a positive correction, not a criticism." He looked at her steadily, the careful, patient attention. "Thank you," he said. She picked up her transit case. He moved to go. Then she said, because it was accurate and she had concluded it was appropriate to say, "You said you're not interested in being assessed as something you're not. I understand that. But there's a distinction between not performing a credential and withholding information that affects operational outcomes. Today the outcomes were positive. In different circumstances, they might not have been." He stopped, turned back to her. His expression was exactly what she had come to expect, processing, locating the accurate response, not defending or deflecting. "You're right," he said. "I'll adjust how I approach the disclosure." "Not to perform," she said. "To inform, there's a difference." "Yes," he said, "there is." She looked at him for a moment more. The corridor was quiet around them, evening transit traffic at Keth 3, people moving through on their own schedules toward their own destinations. She had been in motion since 6:10 this morning. Staging bay, transit, waypoint Reth, waypoint Sella, boundary post 11, commissary, return transit, debrief, personnel documentation. 14 hours, and every hour of them had incrementally adjusted her understanding of the person standing in this corridor. She thought it was worth noting, not in the file, just to herself precisely, that she was not irritated by the adjustment. Adjustments to accurate understanding were the whole point. Inaccurate understanding was the thing to avoid. She had had an inaccurate understanding this morning, had corrected it today, and was standing in front of an accurate understanding now. That was the process working as it should. What she was aware of, which was different from irritation, was something more like attention, a sharper register than she usually brought to the end of an escort mission. 6 weeks, she said. Sector 7. 6 weeks, he said. Prepare the preliminary drift analysis, she said, and the full documentation of the second corrective approach. If the assignment window allows, I would like to walk through the full encoding architecture with you before we reach the first relay node. He looked at her. I can prepare that, he said. A full walkthrough, it'll take most of a transit. We'll have 3 transits, she said. We can use one. Something moved in his expression, the same small shift she had been cataloging all day, which she was now able to read with more precision than she had this morning. It was not surprise exactly. It was the recalibration of someone who had been operating in a defined frame, escort assignment, functional horizon, limited scope, and was adjusting to a different kind of scope being offered. I'll prepare it, he said. Good, she picked up her transit case. I'll send the Sector 7 architecture documentation tonight. I'll read it before I send the preliminary analysis. Send the analysis first, she said. The architecture documentation will take time to work through. I want the initial analysis uncontaminated by the official documentation's framing of the problem. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a good approach. I know, she said. He almost smiled. She noted that it almost happened. She walked toward the connection gate, and behind her the corridor was quiet, and she did not look back because she did not need to. She had everything she needed to have. She was precise, and she did not collect more information than was useful, and what was useful was already noted and filed. The things that were not yet filed were also precisely held. She walked through the gate. The technical review went out at 21:14. His reply arrived at 22:47. It was not a social message. He had written 12 lines, clean, technical, formal, identifying the methodological gap in the drift correction section with more specificity than the network engineering team's own flag report had achieved, and proposing 3 possible approaches to resolving it. Each approach was characterized by its implementation requirements, its access level needs, and its risk profile. The entries were ordered from lowest to highest implementation complexity. The second approach was marked with a brief note, recommended, can be implemented from regional relay management layer without hardware access. Estimated implementation time 4-6 hours by a technician familiar with the epic bridging architecture. Boundary conditions attached below. The boundary conditions followed in 8 additional lines, precise and well-sourced. She had not seen the second approach before. She read through it carefully. Then she read through it again. Then she accessed the Sector 7 architecture documentation and ran the approach against the documented system parameters, checking the boundary conditions against the relay management layer specifications. It worked. The boundary conditions held at every point she tested. The approach was, on examination, not merely valid but elegant. It used the existing management layer infrastructure to implement what would otherwise require direct hardware modification, which meant it could be deployed in the current assignment window without scheduling additional maintenance access. She wrote a 4-line response asking him to document his reasoning on the second approach's boundary conditions in full. She sent it. His reply came 11 minutes later. It was 14 lines, precise and well-sourced, and it was written with the same quality as everything else he had given her today. Exactly what was needed, complete but not excessive, no performance. She read it, made 4 notes in her working file, read it again. Then she started a new contact entry in her assignment planning registry. Tail Saren, Corporal Terran Alliance Field Corps, Keth 3 rotation, current posting window 4 months remaining. Postdoctoral Research Certificate, Velnara Survey Institute, Keth Boundary Sector Xenobiological Methodology. Co-author, 14 published papers. Primary contributor, Institute Relay Encoding Baseline Framework, 7 years in operational use. Encoding Architecture, Intimate Familiarity Across Full Boundary Relay Chain. Recommend, Sector 7 Assignment 6-week window, request to dispatch, pending Observer's Office submission. She paused, added, Authentication Drift Analysis, Sector 4 High Confidence. Sector 7 Drift Correction Approach, Preferred Implementation Path Identified. Flag as Specialist Resource for Relay Encoding Assignments. She looked at what she had written. It was accurate. It was substantially different from anything that had been in the manifest this morning. She added a final line, Initial Assessment, Insufficient. Revised Assessment, High-Value Resource, Non-Standard Qualification Presentation. Self-correction, complete. She set down the data pad and looked at the Keth 3 connection lounge around her, travelers moving through on their own schedules. The transit hall's broad gold light, different from the staging bay's earlier blue, 74 minutes until her connection. She thought about Dr. Oss's expression in the commissary doorway. The particular quality of it, not surprised that he was in the field corps, exactly. She had absorbed the surprise of that separately. But the specific expression of someone who had just understood that the person in front of her didn't know something they should. The expression of someone who had decided, in real time, to do something about that. She thought about the 4-year gap between the Institute and the field corps. He had said, family situation needed a different kind of posting. He had said it twice, once to Dr. Oss years ago and once to her today. The same words, not rehearsed, they had the quality of a true reduction, not a constructed one. The actual shape of something complicated made small enough to carry. She did not know the complicated version. She suspected she would eventually, if the assignment framework went the direction the assignment framework appeared to be going. She would wait. She was very good at waiting for information to become available rather than pushing for it before its time. She thought about a man on a supply crate at 6:14, reading a technical journal article that he had finished by the time she crossed the room. She thought about, he's going to need someone who doesn't perform at him. She had not heard that phrase today. She had no reason to be thinking it. It was not a thing anyone had said to her. But she was thinking something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same territory as that phrase without being it exactly, something that she did not have a precise word for yet, which was unusual. She generally had precise words for things, and when she did not have them immediately, she found them with patience and attention. She was patient, she was attentive, she would find the word. She picked up her data pad and read his 14 lines one more time. The drift correction gap had been flagged for 8 months. He had identified a preferred implementation path in approximately 2 hours, on his own time. On the evening after a mission, he had not been briefed to care about beyond running the escort correctly. She noted this. She noted also that he had said, the second approach asterisk, as if he had already decided before she asked. She wrote the formal assignment request for the observer's office that night before her connection. She cited operational requirements, relay encoding expertise, boundary sector technical familiarity, specialist knowledge essential for Sector 7 mission scope. She appended the preliminary drift correction analysis as supporting documentation, attributed correctly. She sent it. Then she sat in the transit hall for the remaining hour and read the Sector 7 architecture documentation, and thought about the encoding family, and found herself. She was precise about this, also thinking about a man who knew where he was in a document without bookmarking it, and kept a physical notebook in his breast pocket, and stood at windows watching relay arrays turn. She noted that she was thinking about this. She filed it under relevant reason pending. She thought she would know the reason eventually. She was very good at knowing things eventually. The transit hall hummed around her, and outside the Keth 3 windows the sector's relay chain ran its quiet continuous cycles, transferring data in packets across the dark, connecting things that would not otherwise be connected. She thought that was worth something. She noted it. She waited for her connection,